The dust of the Mongolian steppe swirls under hooves and tank treads, the horizon trembling as two empires edge toward a clash neither expected, but both feared. A brutal spark that will shape the course of the coming world war with silent intensity. Hello, welcome back to the channel, and today we dive into an extraordinary confrontation, unfolding far from Europe's spotlight, where the Soviet Union and Imperial Japan tested each other in a struggle of grit, steel, and fierce determination. In the early months of 1939, the steppe felt deceptively calm, a barren land of rolling grass broken only by the river that marked a boundary claimed by both Japan's puppet state of Manchukuo and Mongolia, backed by the might of the Soviet Union. Patrols watched each other across shifting sands, each side confident that the land belonged to them, each unwilling to concede even a handful of soil. Tensions simmered as both armies tested the other's nerve with small incursions, probing movements, and patrols that occasionally erupted into violence long before either nation officially acknowledged what the conflict was becoming. When a small Mongolian cavalry unit clashed with Japanese-backed forces near the river, what might have been a minor border dispute spiraled rapidly, fueled by aggressive officers and unclear maps. Reinforcements poured in on both sides, each thinking the other had overstepped one time too many. Japanese commanders believed speed and boldness could overwhelm their opponent before Soviet reinforcements arrived. They had little idea that the Soviets were already preparing a strong response, guided by the rising General Georgy Zhukov, a commander known for decisive thinking and a willingness to commit overwhelming force. The landscape, with its rolling plains, shallow hills, and the river slicing through the region like a fragile boundary, became the stage for a confrontation neither side could easily control. Many soldiers, both Mongolian and Japanese, marched into battle unaware of the scale this fight would soon reach. Part 1 of the confrontation unfolded with reckless momentum as Japanese regiments launched their early offensives, charging forward with the confidence of an army accustomed to swift victories. Their infantry pushed hard across open plains, supported by light tanks and artillery that hammered Mongolian positions. The Soviets, however, proved far more resilient than expected. Their defensive lines stiffened, bolstered by units arriving from deeper within Mongolia. Soviet pilots patrolled the skies, challenging Japanese aircraft in fierce dogfights that left streaks of smoke across the horizon. As skirmishes intensified, Zhukov arrived to assess the situation firsthand. He met the harsh winds and dust storms of the steppe with calm determination, immediately identifying weaknesses in both terrain and enemy formation that he intended to exploit. As summer deepened, Zhukov assessed the battlefield with cold precision, understanding that Japan's early gains could be reversed only through bold, concentrated force. He began assembling a massive counteroffensive, calling in tanks, artillery, armored cars, and infantry from across the Soviet Far East. Supplies rolled across the plains in long columns, their engines growling through heat and storms. Troops trained relentlessly, practicing coordinated maneuvers that would later define Soviet strategy in the World War to come. Japanese soldiers dug in, confident that their defensive positions and well-disciplined infantry could hold back any Soviet response. But the steppe itself favored mobility, and Zhukov planned to use its vast openness to sweep around Japanese lines and crush them before they understood the scale of what was coming. When the Soviet offensive erupted in August, it struck with the force of a hammer. Zhukov unleashed coordinated assaults that encircled Japanese positions near the river, cutting off supply lines and isolating entire regiments. Soviet tanks roared across the plains in sweeping arcs, smashing through lightly armored Japanese vehicles that struggled to respond to the sheer momentum of mechanized warfare. Artillery thundered day and night, turning defensive positions into burning craters. Aircraft dive-bombed enemy columns, disrupting every attempt to stabilize the front. Japanese units, though courageous and determined, found themselves overwhelmed by firepower they had not anticipated. For the first time in years, the Imperial Army encountered an enemy whose strategy, mobility, and coordination outmatched its own. Of the struggle drew out the raw human dimension of the conflict, as exhausted soldiers clung to foxholes, trenches, and shattered ridgelines. The summer heat blistered skin and equipment alike, while dust storms blinded entire units. Soviet troops pushed forward through smoke and debris, often advancing under constant fire, while Japanese soldiers dug in with unyielding determination, refusing to surrender even when surrounded. Bodies lay scattered across scorched hills, silent testimony to the brutality of the confrontation. Medics worked desperately to save the wounded, carrying men across fields still echoing with gunfire. The air reeked of oil, gunpowder, and burning metal as the battle dragged on. Both armies endured unimaginable hardship, but the Soviets maintained relentless pressure, their coordinated assaults wearing down Japanese positions one painful step at a time. As Japanese forces faced encirclement, desperate attempts to break free led to night assaults, bayonet charges, and last-minute counterattacks. They managed to inflict heavy casualties, but still could not break the tightening Soviet grip. Zhukov continued pressing, directing troops with ruthless clarity, understanding that a decisive victory would send a message across Asia and beyond. Meanwhile, Japanese officers struggled with fragmented information, strained logistics, and mounting casualties. Their soldiers fought with unwavering courage, but the lack of armored support and reliable supply lines made every counterattack increasingly costly. Slowly, the realization spread among commanders that this fight was slipping beyond their control, yet the Imperial army refused to retreat, hoping for a miracle break that never came. By late August, the Soviet encirclement tightened like a steel trap. Japanese forces, despite extraordinary bravery, were pushed back toward the river, their formations shattered, their equipment destroyed or abandoned. Attempts to reinforce or rescue them failed, as Soviet artillery dominated every approach route. The sound of engines, explosions, and cries of wounded soldiers filled the air as the once mighty regiments dissolved under the crushing pressure of coordinated mechanized warfare. The battle's intensity reached a breaking point as pockets of Japanese troops, cut off and isolated, chose to fight to the last man rather than surrender. Soviet units swept through the remaining resistance, securing victory with relentless determination. The plains that had echoed with gunfire for months finally began to fall silent. Of the aftermath revealed not just the military outcome, but the political shockwaves that rippled through Tokyo and Moscow. For the Soviets, the victory became a crucial confidence boost, reinforcing belief in mechanized doctrine and elevating Zhukov to prominence, eventually shaping his role in later global conflicts. For Japan, the defeat forced a dramatic shift in strategic vision. Instead of expanding northward against the Soviet Union, Japanese leaders turned their gaze south, setting the stage for conflicts that would eventually draw them into confrontation with Western powers. The battle's significance, though overshadowed by the massive events that followed, proved essential in understanding Japan's wartime decisions. The battlefield gradually fell silent as September arrived. Smoke dissipated, revealing a landscape torn apart by months of violent combat. Tanks lay rusted in shallow depressions, aircraft wreckage dotted the steppe, and trenches stretched across once peaceful plains. Soviet and Mongolian units secured the region, establishing a boundary Japan would no longer contest. For both sides, the conflict became a lesson carved in blood and steel, highlighting the power of preparation, coordination, and adaptability. Soldiers who survived carried memories of heat, dust, and ferocious combat that would haunt them for decades. Officers analyzed mistakes, victories, and strange turns of fate that had shaped the outcome of the battle. In the end, Khalkhin Gol was more than a battle. It was a turning point hidden in the eastern shadows of global conflict. It was a test of will, a measure of rising powers, and a preview of the mechanized warfare that would soon engulf Europe and the Pacific. Soldiers who fought there carried scars that stayed with them for decades. Commanders used the lessons learned to guide their nations through the storms ahead. And for historians, the battle remains a reminder that even distant, overlooked clashes can change the course of world events in ways unseen at the time. The consequences of the battle echoed far into the geopolitical strategies of the era, influencing diplomatic conversations and intelligence evaluations. Observers from Europe and America studied reports that trickled out of the region, trying to understand how the Soviet Union had managed such a sweeping victory. Military theorists debated the significance of encirclement tactics, the coordination of air and armored units, and the political determination that allowed the Soviets to commit so many resources to a remote frontier. Japanese leaders grappled with the psychological weight of their defeat. Officers who had once believed the Imperial Army invincible now questioned the reliability of their equipment, logistics, and intelligence networks. Among Soviet troops, the victory became a point of pride. Survivors recounted stories of courage under fire, of camaraderie in trenches, and of the sheer determination required to endure the unforgiving steppe environment. These narratives fed into broader Soviet propaganda campaigns, which celebrated the triumph as proof of the nation's resilience and technological superiority. Zhukov's reputation soared, with political leaders recognizing his strategic brilliance and preparing to elevate him into roles that would shape the coming war. For Mongolia, the battle served as a defining moment in its alliance with the Soviet Union. The conflict strengthened ties between the two nations, reinforcing Mongolia's strategic position and securing its borders for decades. Ultimately, Khalkhin Gol stands as a profound reminder of how localized conflicts can reshape global strategy. The clash between two rising powers on a distant frontier helped redirect Japan's expansionist ambitions, reinforced Soviet confidence in mechanized warfare, and contributed to the geopolitical tensions that would explode into World War. Even today, historians look back at the dusty plains and winding river to trace the origins of decisions that shaped the fates of millions in the wider conflict. The legacy of the battle endures in military academies and strategic studies programs worldwide, where students dissect its movements to understand the evolution of 20th century warfare. Its lessons highlight the dangers of underestimating an opponent, the necessity of logistical depth, and the transformative impact of rapidly shifting technology on battlefield outcomes. As analysts revisit the engagement, they recognize it not only as a precursor to the massive conflicts that followed, but also as a moment that challenged assumptions about strength, mobility, and preparedness. These insights continue shaping interpretations of strategy across generations of scholars.